and you will have 3 minutes.
Thanks, Lascion Corla. Taoiseach, I wish to raise with you this morning the issue of pension discrimination against up to 35,000 pensioners in Ireland, and the vast majority of those, in excess of 23,000 of those, being women. You will recall that back in 2012, the then Minister for Social Protection, Deputy Joan Burton, introduced the averaging rule in terms of calculating a person's entitlement to their state pension. And yesterday it was quite revealing when the Minister for Finance, Paschal Donohoe, when partaking in the annual phone-in radio programme with Sean O'Rourke and RTE, when he was challenged by a caller from Longford who outlined how his wife, who had entered the workforce as a student and then took a number of years out to be a homemaker and to raise her family, and was also disbarred from working from the civil service because of the state ban on marriage within the civil service, is now being financially discriminated against and disadvantaged to the tune of €35 per week, and that amounting to almost €1,800 per annum, and are not entitled even to the increase which was announced in the budget. When challenged, Minister Donohoe's reply was that he found it to be quite bonkers and unbelievable. Now, to say that people are outraged at this and at the Minister's reaction and comment, I think would be an understatement. It is really inconceivable that the Minister for Finance would react like that and not have anything substantial to offer these people who are being blatantly discriminated against by the state. And I think it's a shameful indictment on the government of the day, of which you and your colleagues and the Labour Party were party to in making this decision. And Taoiseach, you as a former leading light in the National Women's Council will have heard the comments which came from them and how they have been campaigning and reacting in relation to this. Also, Age Action Ireland have been lobbying on a number of fronts, the Oireachtas members, in advance of the budget. My own party and other parties and individual deputies have been raising this over the last number of years. So, Taoiseach, what I want to ask you is this. Apart from platitudes and sound bites from the Minister which he gave yesterday during his interview with Sean O'Rourke, when he was challenged quite succinctly, what exactly do you and do the government intend to do to address this blatant inequality? It's a gender-based inequality in the main because it impacts on women, as I say, and bearing in mind that a lot of women took time out of the workforce to rear their families, to look after sick relatives, elderly parents, and to rear their children, and to look after their homemaking responsibilities. So could you please outline to the many thousands of women in particular and other pensioners out there who are being discriminated in this fashion, Minister, what the government intends to do? Thank you.
3 minutes.
Well, the Minister in his comments yesterday was referring to the marriage bar and the impact that had had, and almost impossible to believe that that was in place up until the 70s. And certainly I am acutely conscious of the problems women are experiencing accessing adequate pension provision. We had extensive discussions on this as we formulated the National Strategy for Women, which I published in May of this year. And one of the actions in that strategy is to increase women's access to pensions in their own right, improving their access to private and occupational pensions, and to assess the impact of any future reforms to pension policy in this area on women and take actions if appropriate. That's what's been accepted by government in the National Women's Strategy in terms of dealing with this issue. And in line with the National Strategy on Women and Girls, Minister Flanagan and I launched a public consultation on tackling the gender pay gap as well in August, and we do need to drive a whole-of-government agenda to deal with these gender pay issues, including the pension issue, female entrepreneurship, childcare skills and STEM subjects and so on. clearly, this is a complex issue. We do not want to see gender discrimination. Of course we do not in our pension provisions. It is a complex issue to resolve, in the sense that you don't want to create any new anomalies that would discriminate against people who have a contribution history. The current rate plans applying to the SPC, they were introduced from September 2012, reducing previous rates introduced in 2000. These rate bands now reflect the social insurance contributions history of a person more closely than those that were in place previously between 2000 and 2012. It's estimated that to revert to the previous bands from January 2018 would result in an annual cost of over 60 million in 2018, and that annual cost would increase by an estimated 10 million each year, each following year, and it would be expected to cost some 70 million in 2019. Spending this money on reverting to the old rates would not generally benefit the worst-off pensioners who are dependent upon the state pension. This is because the main beneficiaries would be those who have other income means, which means that they do not qualify for a non-contributory pension, which is 95% of the contributory pension. So given that the funds would come from the general pension provision, less well-off pensioners could expect to be worse off if such a course was taken. The savings created by the new rate bands were an alternative to cutting the core rate of pensions at a time when exchequer savings were required and other social protection payments were being reduced across the board. Had a similar approach been taken with pensions affecting everyone over state pension aid, regardless of their means and their contribution record, the hardest hit would have been pensioners with no additional income, notably those paid a state pension, non-contributory, and widows and widowers living alone. A very significant higher portion of such pensioners are women, and this approach would have been expected to result in more women over 65 experiencing difficulties in terms of income. So it's a complex issue. To resolve it is between 200 and 300 million euro overall, but certainly we do not want to see gender discrimination, and the Minister for Social Protection has been having discussions with the Minister for Finance, and those discussions will be ongoing.
Deputy Collins, 1 minute.
Minister, it's just not good enough to come in here and say that this is a complex issue. What's basically happening is that women in the main, and some men, are being blatantly discriminated against because they weren't in the workforce for a number of years. Now, that's not complex. The years that they weren't in the workforce is being used to average down their contributions. There's nothing complex about that. It's just pure discrimination. Now, it's got to be fixed. What I want to ask you is this: Are you happy that this will pertain indefinitely into the future? Has the government got a realistic plan? Because when my colleague, Deputy Willie O'Dea, who is our spokesperson in this area, questioned the Minister for Social Protection earlier this month, he was pointed towards an exercise of total contribution approach. Now, that's not going to solve anything in the short term. So, Minister, what I'm really trying to get from you here is a sense that will this issue be addressed, and can you, in the least, commit to addressing it incrementally? You have pointed to the fact that it may cost up to 60 million, and you then have revised that upwards to a figure of 240 million. So how much is it going to cost? And could you not, at the very least, look at doing this incrementally? Because it just simply isn't fair to be discriminating against people who took time out, and bearing in mind that the state forced many of those to take time out because they were in the civil and public service.
1 minute to respond.
Well, Deputy, I have said to you that clearly any gender-based discrimination in terms of any of our policies and approaches is unacceptable. And certainly this is a serious issue for women who took time out, and in fact some women are suffering every year, as you know, on their pensions because of this, and we're all very familiar with the individual cases. What I'm pointing out is, in order to resolve it, I'm informed that it is overall a sum of 200 to 300 million would be involved in resolving this anomaly. I have said to you that the Minister for Social Protection has had discussions with the Minister for Finance. Clearly that is a huge sum of money to be found in the current context. I have no doubt those discussions will continue to see precisely what remedies can be put in place. But we don't want to create further anomalies, and I am informed that some of the changes could put other groups at risk of their contribution history. For example, if you changed this to a situation where you were disregarding, if you like, the contributions, if you were, for example, moving towards a more universal payment, then you would risk that the contributions that people had actually paid were not resulting in them getting a commensurate pension, and we don't want to create that situation either.